Okay guys, I have did this video like 3 times because one time I did it, it wasn't recording, and then the next time I started it and my phone died, so 3rd time's a charm, right? So today, 14.2 is writing off collecting uncollectible accounts. So yesterday, 14.1 was on uncollectible accounts. We estimated that a percentage of our sales were going to become uncollectible, and then it gave us the percentage like current 1%, 1 to 30, 3%, and then it went up, and then at 90 days it was past due. We had a higher percentage because we're predicting that if somebody goes 90 days, they're not going to pay. So today it's on what we do if they never pay. We have to go write that account off, and writing it off, you're just assuming that the customer's not going to pay. So for your books, you wrote it off, you write it off. And that usually happens after months of unsuccessful collection efforts and whatnot. If we write a customer off, we do not want to tell them that we wrote them off. We do not want them to know, right? Because then they just assume, oh, yay, that's taken care of. But we're also going to learn, if we write them off, what we do if they turn around and they pay us. So we have to reopen that account if we write them off, and then they turn around and pay us. So I will walk us through. You can read through your book. It gives you a pretty good example, but it might be a little confusing because for each thing, there's a few different things that we have to do. Just like everything that we did this year, we have to create a general journal, and then we have to go put them in their own general journal and then in their own accounts. We also have a cash receipts journal, and that's where we put when they turn around and pay us because we're receiving cash, right? So that's our cash receipt journal. So first things first, if we have an uncollectible account, we know our accounts receivable is going to be credited because that reduces the balance from that customer. And then our other account, we have accounts receivable, and then our other account is our uncollectible accounts, which we did yesterday too. And that's going to be debited to reduce the estimate of future uncollectible accounts. So we reduce that because we're writing them off, so that isn't going to be in there anymore because we're predicting we're not going to get that money. So we have to reduce that from the uncollectible. So it says you would debit your uncollectible, right? And you credit your accounts receivable. So in these two T chart, it shows you. So in our book, we write that, right? Debit our debit always goes first in our general ledger. Whatever account we're debiting, we always write that first, right? Okay, so I'm going to walk you through. November 4th, we wrote off Mellon Corp past due account for $494. So the first thing that we have to do, November 4th, we have to debit our uncollectible, right? We're writing them off. So we debit our uncollectible, which it shows us on 418, because we have to reduce the estimate of that. So we debit 494, and then we credit our accounts receivable for 494. Okay, and now that was Mellon Corp. So we go find Mellon Corp. We wrote them off. Where are they at? Okay, yeah, we wrote them off on the 4th, and that's a credit to balance that out because they had a debit balance. So we credit that. Their account's at 0 now, right? And then we have to come down here and we have to write each one in their own account. So we have in our general journal, we have 2 things happening. So we need to go to those and put a deal in or journalize for each account. So our accounts receivable on the 4th was credited, right? Accounts receivable was a credit. And then our uncollectible, we got to go put their debit in. And that was a debit. A credit, and then an uncollectible on the 4th, a debit. We know a debit to a credit, subtract. A debit to a credit, we subtract for our balance. So that was 3 different things that we did for that first transaction. We have to write it in our general journal. We have to post it, close that account, and then we need to write each one in its own ledger. No. Okay. So now on the 15th, we wrote off Horns Company for $1548. So we do the exact same thing. $1548. The 15th, uncollectible, debit, accounts receivable / Horn Company, credit. So then we're going to find our Horn Company. We wrote them off on the 15th. So we credit that, right? Debit, credit, their account's closed out. They zero. Okay, and then we have to come on the 15th, and we had a credit in our accounts receivable and a debit in our allowance for collectibles. Again, you subtract it if it's a credit to a debit. So there was 3 things we did for that transaction. We have to write it in our general journal. Okay, and then we have to close out the account, and we label that as written off on the date that we did it. And then we have to post in our accounts receivable ledger and our allowance for uncollectible ledger. So 3 things for each one, okay? So now on the 8th, Mellon Corp's turn around. This is why we didn't tell them we wrote them off, and they paid us this $494. So now we have to reopen that account, and we received cash from them. So when you have to reopen an account, if you think about it, you're just going to do the exact opposite of what you did when you wrote them off, because then that's going to balance out, right? So you have one entry that's going to reopen the account, and the other entry is for your cash that you receive. And when you reopen an account, it's the opposite entry of what you do for writing it off. So now we learned what we did when we wrote accounts off. So now we're just going to do the exact opposite, right? So we debit our accounts receivable. If we debit our accounts receivable, we write it first, right? So we flip it. Right here, this is the transaction that we closed, and now they paid us. So we flip those. So debit our accounts receivable for $494 and credit our uncollectible for $494. Now we have to go to Mellon Corp and we have to reopen that account. On the 8th, they paid us. So to reopen it, we debit it, and then our debit balance is $494. So that gives us a balance. And then we come back down on the 8th and we credit it. And now it balances. Okay, and then we got to come down here on the 8th. And in our accounts receivable, we debit, right? Because our accounts receivable for reopening that account was a debit. Because each one of these, you have to put all the uncollectibles and all the accounts receivable into their own accounts. Okay, so now that's a debit. And then on the December 8th, our uncollectible got a credit, right? And if it's a credit to a credit, you're going to add it. And up here, same thing. We'll be doing all debit to a debit. You're going to add it, right? Debit to debit, you add. Credit to credit, you add. Okay, so that's how we reopen it. But now, one more thing when we reopen it, we received cash, right? So we have to go right in our cash receipts journal because we're getting cash. December 8th, Mellon Corp. It gives you these reference numbers too. Accounts receivable credit for $494. So then our balance is $494, right? Cash debit. Okay. So then the same thing. December 14th, you're going to write off Fisher Industries for their past due of $1360. So the same thing you're going to do. The 14th, it's an uncollectible, right? Because we're writing them off. $1360. We're going to come up here. Actually, theirs is right here. We wrote them off for $1360 on the 14th. So that balances. We have to write each one. So on the 14th, we have a credit in our accounts receivable, and we have a debit in our uncollectible. Again, you get your totals by a credit to a debit. So you would subtract that, and now you have your new balances. Okay. And then the last one, it says received, Horn Company came back and paid us too. So we do the exact same thing. In our ledger, we flip them, right? You just flip them when they pay us. So then our accounts receivable is our debit. Our credit is our uncollectible. So we'll post them. Horn Company, the 16th, we have to reopen them. So we debit. Then we come down and we credit. And then we have to post each one of those in our accounts receivable and our uncollectible. So on the 16th, we would debit our account receivable, credit our uncollectible. So again, it's just the opposite of that. And then you have to reopen the account. And then when they pay you have to come right in your cash journal, right? Because you received cash. Okay, so that walks us through what we do when we write somebody off, and then what happens if they turn around and pay us. I hope that walks you through it so you can go ahead and do on your own. Here is on your own. And then when you're done, go ahead and shoot me a message of it and let me know if you have any questions. I am always available, guys. I hope you have a good day. Okay, bye-bye.